Of course, yeah. So I just turned 67 on June 27th, so not too long ago, and my near-death experience is when I was 22, so many years ago. And obviously I was younger, and so I had been living in Longmont, Colorado, in the United States, and decided I wanted to come back to visit my parents who lived in Rye Brook, New York. And my roommate at the time was a high school friend of mine, so his parents were from the area also. So we drove back. As soon as I think we got back like in the morning sometime, and we found out a high school friend of ours was having a party. So we wanted to go. We both went to our parents' house and rested for a few hours, and he came to pick me up, and we went to this party that was in Mamaroneck, New York. And we were partying, which involved drinking and doing some other conscious altering things. I had taken my mom's car because when we drove back from Colorado, we took his car. I didn't have my car with me. When I was there feeling a little high, thinking I could easily drive, but as a way to leave my car there and go back the next day and talk to the young lady who was having the party, I decided to ask my friend for a ride home, telling the hostess that I was too high to drive. About almost all the way back to my parents' house, I realized my sister needed my mom's car the next day, so I asked my friend to drive me back to the party. I didn't realize how high I was then, so he drove me back he protested. I explained to him that I was kind of mocking up being high in order to go back the next day and flirt with that girl, basically. And he drove me back to the party. I got in the car. I do still have an image of leaving the party, and even when I look at my inner vision, I should have realized then I shouldn't have driven, because it was kind of, a way things look when you're too high. They're not totally clear, and there's a little, almost too much color there, but people's outlines are not so clear. But I drove home, and in those days, people did not care that much about driving when they were drunk. It just wasn't thing. I lived in an area that now is very populated, wasn't that populated then. So I got in the car. I don't remember actually leaving the house where the party was, but I remember walking towards the door. Like I said, I still have that image in my mind. The next thing I know, so without knowing it, I got in the car. I drove about 2/3 of the way back, even actually more. I drove almost all the way to my parents' house, obviously crashed into a car, because I remember kind of leaving the party, and then I remember being out of my body in the white light, looking down. My body was leaning against the tree, and a police officer was crouching over me, looking at me. I assumed he pulled me out of the car. I never verified that. I did see my body, and my eyes were closed, obviously, and I looked like I was not alive. But everything just had a sense of making sense, and like everything just seemed so perfect, and which seems kind of strange because the car was squished. It was a little Ford Escort or some little Ford car that was totally smashed, and even I could see. Everything seemed fine, but the car was definitely smashed more than it looked like I could survive in there. After the accident, I went back and I looked at it. I was surprised I survived because, the steering wheel and the seat, everything was so smushed together. So I was out of my body. It felt, I often describe it as like the perfect summer day. I like summer, but not too hot. There really wasn't a temperature, but everything just felt so nice. Everything was so peaceful. All these years later, I'm still fumbling to find the right words for it, but it just felt like everything was good. I also had a sense of knowing, my whole family connection, and Just that everything was okay and everything was good. I didn't have, when I try to look inside now and see how to describe it and what I knew, it's hard to put into words, but it's kind of like just everything in the world was okay. So I was looking this way, the tree was there, the body was there, it was dark there, but also everything I was in was all this white light. Behind me, even though I wasn't looking that way, there was like a ball of a different shade of white light, like a big circle. I guess it wasn't a ball because it didn't seem to have 3 dimensions. It seemed more like 1 dimension. And then in the center of that, and I start to say that, I can see the image, and this spiritual energy starts to pull me into the spirit there. There was a being that looked like a person, but a white light image of a person with a different shade of white light radiating off of that with a little bit of gold sparkles at the end of that. That being said to me, "You have to go back, your father wants you to stay." I knew right then the father that voice was talking about was God, not my physical father. And from that perspective of everything was so good and everything was so proper, sometimes people ask me, did you have a choice? I didn't even think of having a choice. It just seemed like, well, this all makes so much sense. I went back into my body, came to 3 days later in the hospital. During those 3 days, there were a couple of times I almost came up to the surface and have some hazy visions of what was going on. Still remember after, this was actually, I was standing up, so it must have been somewhat after I first came to. I remember seeing the neurologist's face very close to me, because he was talking to me and he walked like this. He said, "You're really lucky," with this smirk on his face, like, I don't know what. And I assume he meant you're lucky to be alive. One of the nurses also said to me it was touch and go for you for a while, which I assume meant about living. I never checked. It was back in a time where doctors didn't give the patients that much information. They didn't feel like that was necessary. My dad, this later I went back and checked with him. He said he came there. He was allowed to go in to see me for a moment, and he said my head, the skin on my head, he could see like inside my head, because it was, and you can still, if you look closely, I have this scar that goes all the way back. But they didn't really tell him what was going on either. And, I tried to ask him specific questions. I did have a Polaroid of the car that I still have a feeling it's somewhere at my dad's, but I haven't been able to find it yet. Something shifted inside of me. The one thing I noticed after, definitely, is when I went to touch people, my hands became very warm. It's really the only very concrete thing that happened, but I was curious about what it was. It definitely piqued my interest to find out what that was. My intuition was increased. Again, it's not such a concrete thing, that part of it. And I became very interested in knowing, like, what happens after we die, what did happen. I know that term was, near-death experience was coined around that time, but I had never heard of that. I did start to meet a lot of people. One of the very interesting things that happened after my near-death experience, I didn't go back to Colorado for a while. My mom convinced me to move back east. And one day I was sitting in my apartment and someone knocked on the door. It was pre-cell phone time, so you wouldn't, like nowadays, if someone knocks on my door, it's kind of puzzling to me because everyone always texts before coming over. It was before that. So I got up, I answered the door. There was this beautiful woman at the door, and she explained she was the sister of a good friend of mine. And she said, "Oh, my sister said something interesting about you." And this woman ended up introducing me to a Sufi sheikh who was a spiritual teacher. And so describing what happened, like what that white light was, what the white light I was in, and what the being was, I didn't know what words to put on that. I did not know. I didn't talk to anyone about it. It was like, I didn't even know if it was, it felt so real to me, but I didn't have any reference of things I knew before, like what that could possibly be. When this man started talking to me, it is interesting. I was born in a Jewish family. A Sufi sheikh, Sufism is part of the Islamic religion. He started to talk to me about a few things that really, like, that's what happened. He talked to me about Mary and Jesus a lot, which it's kind of funny in an interesting way that an Islamic teacher was talking to a Jewish young man about Christian concepts. But when he talked about how open Mary was to the Christ energy, and just the way he described it, that feeling that I got described the white light all around. And then he talked about Jesus, and it was like, whoa. Just, again, the feeling, and even when I say it now, it connects in my inner vision and stuff, that being behind me was Jesus talking to me. Yes, that white light being behind me was Jesus, yes. I just didn't know it at the time, and I didn't even know what to make. It was like nowadays people talk about these things. Back then it was like, who's this crazy person, basically. In one way, it's good that I don't know, and I still don't really know, because there is always more to know there. When I talk to people, I tell them, and I'll say this to you and your audience, there is information behind what I'm saying that is the real information. When I work with people, I see things. Sometimes I don't know exactly what it is, but I do know, and I say this, when I'm talking to you, listen to me, I am right. I am always right, which seems kind of arrogant, but behind the words, there's the spiritual message, and something in there really directs people in a great way. Something happened in my near-death experience that caused this woman to show up at my door to meet this Sufi sheikh, and I've met many other teachers through what seems like these crazy coincidences, and it just, things unfold, and part of me, even now, getting a specific vision sometimes, or thinking that impedes what you can really know, because it's kind of what we know is concrete, and this in the spirit it is infinite, so there's always more to do. Right, it's exciting and fun and enthusiastic, and when sometimes I meditate, and this energy comes in, and it's my body feels better, my emotions feel better, my mind is clear, and when I work with clients, the same thing happened. And sometimes I'm working with people, I'm kind of talking about stuff to distract them, and like the spirit sneaks in here. And then it's like they all of a sudden go, oh, I feel better. It's like, oh yeah, that's because your mind is not trying to pin it down. And so those cool things happen. You're welcome. It is a lot of work. And you're saying that I have made my life's purpose, but it's also something in me is pushing me in that direction. It'd certainly be easier to have a job where you make a lot of money and not have to look at yourself so ruthlessly, and your inhibitions and your patterns that are holding you back. But in one way, I don't really have much choice about it. It's just part of my nature, I guess. And the other way is, well, you might as well choose into it and make it really cool. So yes, my doctorate is actually in something called spiritual science. And the good thing about that is a lot of it was learning to use a scientific method to validate these spiritual experiences and spiritual tools. So it's always keep using your mind, even though it's holding your mind back, and not let it take over, to look at those spiritual experiences, look at the things in your heart, the things in your gut, and how do you use them in a way to help myself to be happy and healthy and abundant, and help my clients to do that also. Some of the very cool spiritual teachers and healing teachers that I studied with that definitely have amazing things, either spiritually or healing physically, they had near-death experiences, so I know it is somewhat of a thing. It kind of gives us a look into this other dimension or level or whatever you want to call it in a way without our physical body. So there is no doubt about it. And, in the times in my physical life when I have doubts, I can just think of that and go, no, it's real. Even though part of me thinks it's not. That it's like, and so I've studied, I have made it my life's mission, and I study a lot with people. I've gone to school. There's always more. And if you think there's not, you're wrong. There's always more to do, and you can always go further and learn more. I'm always looking, how can I help people more? I'm very good at not labeling things, but I notice my mind comes in and wants to know what something is. And that's like, well, how can I do that without holding back that spiritual part?